Welcome to The Analytic Christian. I'm Jordan, and this is the channel that helps you explore Christian philosophy and theology. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Eric Sampson. He's a professor of philosophy at Rhodes College, and we're both attending a philosophy of religion workshop at Virginia Commonwealth University. Eric's just given a talk on a paper that he's writing, and I thought it would be good for you all to hear about this. It's a really interesting idea. So, welcome.
Thanks.
This paper talks about effective altruism. So can you explain what that is first?
Sure. So effective altruism is a movement among a bunch of moral philosophers, but it's becoming even wide, beyond the philosophical community, where basically what they want to do is make the world the best place they possibly can, given the limited resources that they have. So another way to say it is they take a scientific approach to charity and making the world a better place. Sort of standard example to sort of show you the ethos of the effective altruists is they say, look, a lot of people would give money to something like seeing eye dogs. This is a good thing. It's a dog that helps blind people see. That costs about $40,000 a year to train a seeing eye dog. Alternatively, you could give $40,000 to organizations in Africa that buy drugs that prevent a certain bug that people can get that turns their eyelids inside so that when they blink, it scrapes their eyes and makes them become blind. You could prevent something like 500 cases of blindness for that same $40,000. So what should you do with that $40,000? The effective altruists say, don't give it to the seeing eye dogs. You should give it to preventing trachoma. And that's because it's the most effective way to use your money. Whereas most people think, look, as long as you're doing good things, it doesn't matter how effective you are. They're effective altruists, so they want to be as effective as possible.
Now, how is this different than just regular old altruism?
Well, so regular altruism says, look, as long as you're given to good stuff, that's a good thing to do. And it doesn't much matter how effective it is. You don't need to pay careful attention to how many people you've helped or how long you've extended someone's life, as long as you're giving to something good. The effective altruists say, no, it's crucially important that you be as effective as you possibly can. Here's another example. Suppose there's a burning building and there's 2 kids inside, and you go ahead and you bear the cost to run into the burning building. And suppose I could take both children and save them, but I only save one. And when I get out, I say, hey, look, everyone, I saved 1 kid. And they say, but you could have saved 2. Why didn't you take 2? And I say, but didn't I make a good sacrifice? And the thing to say is, no, you should have saved 2. There were 2 kids in there. And the thought is, yeah, that's the same with charity. Merely saving 1 kid when you could have saved 2, or when you could have saved 3, when you prevented 1 case of blindness when it could have been 500 cases of blindness, you should definitely have done the 500 rather than the 1.
Now, you mentioned some proponents of this group, or some notable people in this group, or they're influenced by like Peter Singer, Nick Bostrom.
Right. These are all utilitarians. So utilitarianism has a long history in moral philosophy, but basically utilitarians are a kind of consequentialist, and consequentialists think that the rightness or wrongness of your action depends entirely on the consequences of those actions. So it doesn't matter what your intentions are. That doesn't make your action right or wrong. It doesn't matter if you respected or violated people's rights. That doesn't determine whether your action is right or wrong. It's entirely the consequences of your action. And you can see why this is an attractive view if you think, look, it doesn't much matter what you tried to do if you made the world a terrible place. Like, we shouldn't really be concerned with that. We should be concerned with how the world turns out. And so these effective altruists are very much influenced by those kinds of figures.
Okay. Now, in the paper, you talk about the old emphasis and this new emphasis. So what are what's that contrast? What's the difference there?
Yeah, so effective altruists, in the early days of effective altruism, this is probably 10 or 15 years ago, they thought, look, the way to make the best impact on the world for good is to take care of immediate problems, things like global poverty. So utilitarians, and especially inspired by Peter Singer, who's like the arch utilitarian these days, have said, look, you have people in the West tend to be excessively rich compared to people elsewhere, and so they should take some of their excess income and give it to the global poor and prevent poverty. Or we should use it to prevent factory farms. This is like places where large amounts of animals are put in really rough conditions in order to produce our food. A lot of effective altruists say we should have stopped that. Those are like here and now concerns. These days, effective altruists are becoming more and more these people called long-termists. That is, people who think, look, actually what we should be worried about if we're interested in bringing about the best consequences we can with the resources we have is we should look to the distant future. Because over that vast stretch, and we're talking billions or trillions of years hence, the ability or the potential to bring about so much value over that stretch is so huge that it's really important that we play our cards right now. And one crucial way of playing our cards right now is to prevent ourselves from being destroyed. So they're concerned with existential risks. So certain risks that could wipe out all of humanity, things like nuclear war or global pandemics or a really important cause for them is artificial intelligence, and they're worried that artificial intelligence may become super intelligent, so intelligent that it can basically impose its will on us and kill us if it wants to do that and destroy us. So they thought, look, if what we're interested in is maximizing good consequences and we have this huge future ahead of us, we should be really careful to play our cards right well over the long term. So that's more important even than the here and now concerns like factory farming and global poverty.
Okay. Now, those are considered existential catastrophes. That's what they're calling it. But you think they've neglected a catastrophe, and this is a religious catastrophe. So can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so this is a new existential risk that I think that effective altruists have ignored. I say new because it's not new at all to many religious people. So the threat that I call religious catastrophe is the threat that, as Christians and Muslims and probably other religious traditions have said for centuries, billions of people stand in danger of going to hell for all eternity. And if that is the case, if that's true, then very few things could be more morally important. Maybe nothing at all could be more morally important. So if what we're interested in is the long term and eternity in heaven or hell is the long term, then what we should be concerned about is whether people go to hell or heaven for all eternity. And so far, effective altruists have entirely ignored that. My own view about why that is because for the most part, the people who are effective altruists have been influenced by secular moral philosophers, and so religion just isn't on the radar because it's either they don't find it plausible, or even more, it's not a very fashionable thing to be concerned about. It's kind of goofy, and people will make fun of you if you were worried about that. So they just haven't paid attention to it at all.
All right. Now, you think they face a dilemma, and we're going to work our way there. So the way I understood it as you presented it, we need to make a couple steps to get to the dilemma. So first, here's a question. Why do you think religious catastrophe is just as bad as those other existential catastrophes?
Yeah, so the standard existential catastrophes about which effective altruists worry are things, as I said, like nuclear war and asteroids colliding into the Earth and artificial intelligence killing us and a catastrophic climate change that would destroy us all. All those things are admittedly very, very bad. But if they were to occur, it would extinguish just a finite amount of value because on an atheistic worldview, at some point the world's going to die a heat death, and so all value is already going to be extinguished. So this extinguishes it a little earlier. Mm-hmm. That's very bad, and so we want to prevent that. Even if atheism is true, we want to prevent existential catastrophe. But it would be even worse if people go to hell for all eternity, because that would be an infinite amount of disutility or disvalue that is realized in this person's life. And if they were to convert to the correct religion and have eternity in bliss, that would be an infinite amount of value that lies in their future. So if you think that what's really important is bringing value into the world and preventing disvalue from coming into the world, then I think religious catastrophe is really important, even more important than the standard catastrophic risk. But all I need for my argument is that it's at least as important as things like nuclear war and artificial intelligence killing us.
Okay, so I kind of see that as step one, establishing that religious catastrophes at least as bad as, if not worse, than these other catastrophes. Now, the second step would be, is religious catastrophe roughly as likely as these other catastrophes?
Yeah, so in order to show that they should care about it, it has to be reasonably probable. If it's 0% chance that it happens, then they don't need to worry about it. Or if it's so improbable that, you don't really need to think about it, then that would be, then you could safely ignore religious catastrophe. But I think, many of the things about which they worry, by effective altruists' own lights, they're not very probable events. So Toby Ord, who's written about existential catastrophe the most among effective altruists, gives probability estimates for some existential catastrophes. For instance, he estimates that the probability that an asteroid or a comet would hit the Earth and destroy us all is about 1 in a million. And he still thinks it's worth expending resources to prevent that from happening. So even if it's a 1 in a million chance of existential catastrophe, we should really be worried about that. He thinks that a stellar explosion that would destroy us all is 1 in a billion, and yet he still thinks it's worth worrying about that. Naturally arising pandemics he regards as 1 in 10,000. He wrote this pre-COVID. So climate change, catastrophic climate change, he regards as a 1 in 1,000 chance. So these are the kinds of probabilities about which they're still worried. And so now the question is religious catastrophe roughly that probable? And I think the answer is yes, even for secular effective altruists. So my view is that everyone should become a theist tomorrow and be worried about it, even if you're a non-theist, even if you're a staunch atheist. you should still be worried about this because I think the probability that there is a hell that lasts for eternity is at least 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 or somewhere in the vicinity of the things about
Or
which
like that
they
comet,
worry.
1 in a million.
Yeah, 1 in a million. Yeah, absolutely. And why do I think that? Well, lots of reasons. I mean, the first thing is I could sort of take you through the first order evidence about all the arguments for God's existence and against God's existence, but rather than do that, what I like to do is just say this. It's generally regarded as true that, look, if lots of really sharp people have thought about an issue and they've come to a certain conclusion about it, then that's pretty good evidence that that claim is true. It's not, it definitely doesn't decide it. You can't figure out all your philosophical problems just by taking a poll, but that's pretty good evidence that there's something going for that view. So Phil Papers is an organization that just surveys philosophers about their philosophical opinions and sort of groups them together and delivers the results. So here's just some results from the Phil Papers study. Professional philosophers, who I regard as among the most educated and skeptical people on the planet, according to the 2020 Phil Papers survey, 18.83% of them accept or lean towards theism. And about 7.21% are agnostic. So that means that over a fourth of professional philosophers think that either theism is true or agnosticism is true, which means that they are reasonably confident that there's somewhere in the vicinity of 50% confident that theism is true. Among the philosophers who study philosophy of religion and specialize in it, 77.77% of them believe in God. So among the people most familiar with the arguments for and against God's existence, 3/4 of them or more believe in some sort of theistic religion. So that's obviously that doesn't settle anything, and certainly with philosophy of religion, there's the selection effect, which is to say the kinds of person who's interested in becoming a philosopher of religion is going to be the person who's already sort of inclined to believe in these sorts of things. But even that selection effect isn't enough to destroy the evidential value of the fact that the people most familiar with these arguments come to believe that God exists. So that suggests that the arguments aren't so powerful, the arguments against God's existence aren't so powerful that no reasonable person could possibly believe. All that's supposed to say, it looks like the kind that the probability that some religion is true, with heaven and hell type stakes is true, isn't like 1 in a million or 1 in 1,000, or it's at least 1 in a million or 1 in 1,000. Mm-hmm. And if it is, and it's just as bad or worse than the standard existential risk, then by secular effective altruist lights, by their own lights, they should worry about religious catastrophe.
Okay, so we're almost done. How do you what's the dilemma then for these effective altruists?
Yeah, so I say there is a dilemma for effective altruists. A dilemma is just when you have two options and neither of them are especially attractive. So the dilemma I say is, look, effective altruists, given all the things that I've just said, they have a choice. Either they can adopt religious catastrophe as yet another one of their catastrophic risks about which they worry and devote resources to, or they can totally ignore religious catastrophe. That's fine, but they'd also need to ignore many of the standard existential risks about which they worry that have a similar probability and badness, and I think that's roughly all of them. And so why would this be a dilemma? Why would this be bad? Well, I think it's unattractive to effective altruists to take on religious catastrophe as one of their causes because it's just, if you know the culture of effective altruists, it's just not the kind of thing they do. It's religion, and it suggests that the way to prevent this is to send missionaries out into the world and convert people to religion, and that just seems goofy and just very anti-intellectual, just not the kind of academic spirit. And look, these people are part of communities, and they want to be cool and thought well of, and that's just not the kind of thing that if you're worried about, you're going to be thought well of by your colleagues. So I don't think they're going to find that attractive. The other thing they could do is just totally ignore religious catastrophe, but also ignore all the standard existential risks. But that would sort of destroy the whole point of effective altruism. Like the point was to worry about making the world the best place you possibly can, and they're convinced and have been for a long time that these existential catastrophes about which they worry are really important. So it would basically just destroy the movement to give up on all these things that they've been worried about for a long time. So both of those are unattractive, but yet I think that's the choice they face, and their principles sort of guide them to there. I haven't imposed my own principles. I'm saying your own principles suggest to you that you got to make this choice. So my own view is that they should say, okay, well then I guess religious catastrophe is going to be one of our options, or one of our causes, and maybe we'll endure some ridicule from our colleagues, but I guess that's how it's got to go. My own view is that that's in the culture itself. They've long prided themselves on following the argument where it goes. They're worried about artificial intelligence destroying us. Many regard that as a goofy sci-fi hypothesis, and yet they sort of stare people in the face and are unmoved by that, and they're happy to take that on as a cause, and I think they should do the exact same thing. It's consistent with their principles to also take on religious catastrophe and just, carry on in the face of laughter from other people.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It was a fun talk, and I really enjoyed hearing it. So thank you all for watching, and keep exploring Christianity.